My name is Sophia, I'm 26, and I didn't expect the last thing I heard before the world went dark to be a nurse whispering, "Stay with me, honey," while my phone lit up with missed calls that weren't from my parents. The doctors had told them I might not make it through the night. They said they couldn't come because my sister, Victoria, was walking her dog. That sentence will never stop sounding like a bad joke. Except it isn't a joke when you're the punchline. I used to think a moment like that would destroy me. Instead, it rearranged me. It made room for a single sheet of paper that I left on a hospital bed, ink on folded stationery. That changed everything for good. Before I begin, drop a quick comment telling me where you're watching from. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, tap like and subscribe so this story finds the people who need it. Stick with me. The first 3 minutes matter because that's how long it took me to understand I'd spent my whole life trying to earn something that should have been given freely. From the street, our Pennsylvania house was a brochure, white picket fence, geraniums, a brass knocker that looked like a lion. Inside there were 2 daughters and 1 orbit. I was the older one who learned to make myself small. Victoria, 3 years younger, was the sun everyone grew plants toward. When I was 7, I came home with a blue ribbon for the school science fair. Mom patted my head without taking her eyes off Victoria wobbling down the driveway without training wheels. Dad said, "Atta girl," then jogged after Vic, shouting coaching tips like she was entering the Tour de France. I told myself it made sense. Bikes are big. A ribbon is paper. Paper doesn't need parents the way people do. By 12, I'd mastered the art of adjusting my expectations. Straight A's meant a nod. Victoria's B in art meant a celebratory sundae and a framed masterpiece on the fridge. When I qualified for state in swimming, Dad clapped my shoulder and said he was proud but couldn't attend. Vic had a cold, poor thing, and someone had to hold her hand and fetch lemon tea. I learned an adult skill early, crafting reasonable-sounding excuses for unreasonable behavior. They were busy. She was younger. I was so independent, Mom said, like it was a medal I'd won for learning how to soothe my own disappointments. At 16, my body joined the opposition. A severe autoimmune disorder moved in and started redecorating. Daily meds, regular labs, careful food, and a particular vulnerability to animal dander. Stress could flip a switch and I'd go from fine to on fire, hives and a throat that forgot how to be a throat. Even then, my illness registered more as an inconvenience on my parents' calendar than as a living person's crisis. Appointments meant sighs about parking. Runs meant Dad muttering about deductibles. Meanwhile, Victoria was a healthy meteor. Soccer, friends, homecoming court. My parents never missed a game. I never missed the feeling of sitting next to them, dizzy from a flare, watching them cheer for the child whose mere existence earned applause. When college came, the math went like this. "We can only help 1 child," Dad said, eyes soft with regret that never became action. "Vic isn't academic like you, sweetie," Mom added. "She needs the support more." I worked 3 jobs and kept a 4.0. Victoria tried 1 semester and quit. To soften the blow, my parents bought her a car that cost more than my entire tuition for a term. I kept telling myself stories. They helped me survive, they also kept me stuck. Hope is stubborn. Even after graduating with honors, landing a good marketing job, and moving 30 miles away to build my own life, some quieter part of me still held a candle for the idea that one day my parents would really see me. I kept visiting, kept bringing thoughtful gifts, kept remembering birthdays and favorite desserts and the little things because I believed little things made a mosaic called family. Victoria stayed home, cycled through jobs like outfits, posted perfect selfies with pastel captions, and floated on the kind of support that never runs out because no one ever asks it to. Then came Snowball. Not a season, a Samoyed. $3,000 worth of fluff with a designer bed and a room that used to be Dad's home office. "He's family," Mom said the first time I explained again about my dog allergy, about how even with meds I couldn't spend hours in the same house without paying for it. "You can take an extra pill, sweetie," she added. "Victoria really needs this for her emotional well-being." That's us in a sentence. Victoria's feelings outranked my physical safety. A whole history book summarized in 1 throwaway line. Till I tried. 3 months ago I called and suggested dinner. Mom sounded thrilled. Lasagna, cheesecake from my favorite bakery. I bought wine and a new dress and swallowed a bitter pill called optimism. When I arrived, the house smelled like basil and memory. Then came the bark. "Is Snowball here?" I asked, already feeling that tightness start up in my chest. "Of course," Mom said. "It's his home." I reminded her gently. She waved it off gently. That word does a lot of dirty work in families like mine. We sat. We ate. We talked about Snowball's training, Snowball's organic food, Snowball's playdates. My promotion floated past like a leaf in a river. My night classes sank without a ripple. By dessert, my eyes were watering, hives stippled my neck, and breathing felt like sipping air through a coffee stirrer. "Whoa," Victoria said cheerfully. "You're very blotchy. Pop a Benadryl and chill." I excused myself, thanked them, drove home with a pharmacy bag and a prayer, and told myself what I always told myself. They don't mean to hurt you. They just don't understand. And then very quietly another voice replied, "They understand. They just don't care enough to change." 3 days later I woke up inside a pounding storm. Skin on fire. Lungs heavy. Room swimming. I had a presentation I'd built for weeks, and the part of me trained from childhood to perform no matter what laced up her shoes and said, "We're going." On the way to the office, memories lined the highway like billboards. My first major flare at 17. Mom visiting once between a recital and a hair appointment. Dad calling daily but never coming because hospitals made him uncomfortable. Pneumonia in college. They sent money and stayed with Victoria through her breakup. Loneliness looks different when you're technically an adult. It looks like convincing yourself that needing someone makes you childish. By the time I staggered to my desk, my coworker Natalie took one look and turned into the kind of friend everyone deserves exactly when they don't expect it. "You're going to the ER," she said, already grabbing her keys. "I'll run your deck." I argued out of habit, she ignored me out of love. In the car I dialed my parents. Voicemail. I left a calm message. I called Victoria. She answered over the sound of Snowball trying to eat her shoes. "I'm heading to the hospital," I said. "Can you tell Mom and Dad?" She promised to text them and then hung up because the dog was winning the sneaker war. Triage is designed to catch you before you fall. They did. Epinephrine. Steroids. Oxygen. Questions I tried to answer as darkness pushed soft hands over my eyes. The last thing I remember clearly is apologizing to no one and everyone for asking my neighbor Mrs. Garza to feed my cat. Then everything went quiet. Later I heard the calls the hospital made. I heard the nurse's words, "Tonight might be her last," and my father's reply, "We need to pick up Victoria after the dog park," and the nurse's stunned silence stretching wide enough to fit a lifetime inside. I remember a different nurse, older, gray curls escaping her cap, holding my hand and telling me she'd stay. She did. When my body fought itself and the machines beeped and the air felt like gravel, a stranger sat where parents should have been and refused to let go. Stabilizing is a verb. It took a night and then another day. By morning I was still in ICU but I wasn't sliding anymore. Natalie came at lunch. Brian from work sent flowers as big as a promise. People I'd counted as colleagues became something else entirely, showing up, sitting quietly, telling stories while my brain climbed out of fog. My parents didn't call. Victoria didn't text. The truth is heavy until it isn't. When it settled I felt lighter. Not happy. Clarity will ask you to act. Mine asked for paper. The first time I asked the nurse, Ellie, kind eyes, steady hands, for a pen and a few sheets, I cried before I wrote a single word. Not because I was sad. Because I knew I was about to stop being the version of Sophia who kept hoping hard enough would be enough. Dr. Rivera, the immunologist who explained the perfect storm inside my blood, told me it had a name, biphasic anaphylaxis. Severe, rare, harder to catch because it blooms late. Could I have died? I asked. Yes, she said without cruelty. Honesty can be a kind of kindness. Between vitals and 4 bag changes I drafted. I crossed out the parts that sounded like pleading. I kept the parts that sounded like me. I didn't write a manifesto. I wrote a door. Here is what I said on the other side. Mom and Dad, by the time you read this, I will be discharged from the hospital where I spent a week fighting for my life. The doctors called you the first night and said I might not see morning. You chose not to come because Victoria needed help walking her dog. This isn't the first time you have chosen Victoria over me. It is simply the first time the cost was printed in bold. For 26 years I have made reasonable excuses for unreasonable patterns. I have told myself that my independence meant I didn't need what my sister needed. I almost died waiting for you to see me. I'm not writing in anger. I'm writing in clarity. I'm stepping back from this relationship until there is acknowledgement of harm and commitment to change. Please do not contact me for now. Someday you are ready to build something different, equal, respectful, real. I will consider opening the door. I'm not locking it to punish you. I'm closing it to save myself. I sealed it in an envelope Ellie brought and wrote their names on the front. On day 7, when discharge papers rustled and tape lines on my arms felt like dotted roads home, Ellie told me my parents were finally coming at 3. Do you want me to prevent the visit? She asked gently. No, I said. Let them come. I just won't be here. I handed her the letter. Would you set it on the bed? At 2:30, Natalie picked me up. We sat in a coffee shop across from the hospital, the two of us quiet in a way only comfortable friendships are. At 3:15, my parents walked in. They looked the way people look when they are late to something they believe they weren't obliged to attend. I didn't watch long. Liberation doesn't require witnesses. Recovery outside hospital walls looks like small things. It looks like Natalie's spare room with sunlight and clean air. Looks like sleeping 12 hours and learning again how to trust your lungs. It looks like Mrs. Garza calling to tell you your cat has decided the windowsill in her apartment is his afternoon office. It looks like a first therapy appointment with Lydia, who listens as if she can hear the parts of your story you aren't brave enough to say yet. You were the scapegoat, Lydia said in our 3rd session, not unkindly. Victoria was the golden child. Systems like that survive by convincing the scapegoat to work for love they'll never be given. I asked the question kids like me always ask. What did I do wrong? And she cut it off at the root. Exist, she said. You existed as a separate person. That's all it takes in that kind of family. I changed my emergency contacts to Natalie and Mrs. Garza. I updated my advance directive to keep medical decisions far from people who had already chosen not to show up. I bought high-grade air purifiers for every room in my apartment and weeks later for my new apartment in a different city with filtration built into the walls. I went back to work slowly with a boss who meant it when he said, health first. I read the email from my father, minimizing, apologetic, defensive, human, and sent a brief response that protected my boundary without spitting on his effort. I let my mother's voicemail sit unheard. Victoria called eventually. Mom and Dad are acting weird, she said, like grief was a broken appliance. When I told her what the nurse had said about me maybe dying, she was quiet for a long time. They told me it wasn't a big deal, she said. Would you have done anything differently if you'd known? I asked. I don't know, she said honestly. I've never had to think about that. Everything's always about me. For the first time in years, I heard my sister instead of the part of me that resented her. That's not your fault, I said. But I can't live inside that anymore. A week after discharge, Ellie called with the part of the story I didn't see. They read your letter, she said. Your dad crushed it in his fist, then smoothed it out. Your mom sat down like a puppet whose strings were cut. They stayed 45 minutes without speaking. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel guilty. I felt like a person who had finally told the truth. 2 weeks later, I moved through my apartment like someone mapping a future. I kept the good dishes I'd been saving for holidays that never felt like holidays. I donated the rest. I put the letter's first draft, messy, tear-marked mine, in a folder labeled Records, next to my medical papers. I told Natalie thank you for the 1,000th time and she told me to hush for the 1,000th time. I stood at the window and watched the sky turn the color of forgiveness. Not theirs, mine. If you're still here, you've felt some version of this. Of being the reliable one, the self-cleaning child, the adult who doesn't ask. I want to say this clearly before we go further. Your worth isn't a prize. It isn't earned with grades or grace or swallowing discomfort to make dinner easier for everyone else. If this story is hitting a nerve, hit like so it travels. Share it with the friend who always apologizes for needing anything. And stick around. In the middle we'll get to the letter's aftershocks. The day my parents showed up at my door uninvited, the conversation that didn't spiral because I refused to spin, the sister who surprised me, and the family I started to build on purpose rather than proximity. For now, picture this. A hospital bed made crisp by a nurse who has seen hundreds of families, some bound tight by love and some by habit. On that bed, a folded white envelope with 2 familiar names on the front and 4 pages inside that don't beg or bargain. Words that feel like a hand on a doorknob. A click. Air flowing in where it hadn't for a long time. I didn't know yet what my parents would do with that air. I only knew what I would do with mine. I would breathe. I would learn new definitions of family that included coworkers in sensible shoes, neighbors with soup, doctors who tell the hard truth softly. I would stop auditioning for a part one was never going to get. And when my phone finally buzzed with the message that they were on their way to talk this out, I would be ready, not to fight but to hold steady, to keep the door I'd chosen at the angle that keeps me alive. I turned my phone face down and let it vibrate itself quiet on the coffee table. The message preview had been neutral in tone. We're on our way to talk this out. As if conflict were a clogged drain and not a grief. Natalie watched me from the kitchen, one hand braced on the counter, the other curled around a mug. You want me to stay? She asked. I can pretend I'm reorganizing your pantry in the background. I want you to live your Saturday, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. And I want to live mine. If it goes sideways, I'll text our code word. What's the code word again? Pineapple, I said. It made us both smile for a second, which is what code words are for. After she left, I did something small that felt big. I opened a window. Fresh air came in and the curtains did that slow breathing thing they do when the day is mild and the world remembers how to be ordinary. I didn't pace. I didn't rehearse. I made tea and sat. When the knock came, 3 taps, my father's rhythm from every childhood family talk. I stood and let my feet decide the rest. They looked exactly like themselves and not at all like themselves. Mom's lipstick was perfect. Her eyes were not. Dad's posture had the proud straightness of a man who still believed in his arguments. His shoulders had a new slope, like a question mark learning to be honest. I didn't move from the threshold. Hi, Sophia, Dad said. He glanced past me into my apartment like he was taking inventory. A plant thriving in the window, the neat stack of books, the folder labeled records on the desk. You look well. I'm healing, I said. This isn't a good time to come in uninvited. If you'd like to schedule a conversation, we can. Not today. Mom's mouth trembled. We drove all this way. You can't be serious. I am. The letter asked for space. This is me using it. Dad's jaw tightened. We are your parents. And I'm an adult, I said simply. Boundaries don't dissolve because of DNA. There was a long moment where the old choreography tried to step in. The part where I soften, apologize for making it hard, usher them in so no neighbor hears raised voices. I didn't. I let the silence be a boundary too. Can we at least give you this? Mom asked finally, holding up a manila envelope as if it were a peace lily. Some things. And a letter. From both of us. I'll take it, I said. I reached out but didn't step back. The exchange felt ceremonial, like visiting dignitaries handing over credentials. We didn't understand how serious, Dad began. The nurse told you, I said not unkindly. And I told you for years. You didn't want the seriousness to be true because it inconvenienced the story you told yourselves. That's an explanation, not an excuse. I'm not asking you to debate it here. Mom swallowed. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, and I let the observation exist without being a directive to take care of her feelings. When? She asked. When can we talk properly? I could say never. I could say later. I chose something honest that left both of us human. Send me 3 times next week that work for you. We'll pick one for a call. If we can keep that call respectful, we can schedule another. That's all I'm offering right now. It was the kind of answer that makes no one happy and everyone safer. They left without hugging me. The door clicked. My body shook afterward, not from fear but from the shock of doing something new and surviving it. I put the manila envelope on the table and let it sit there like a guest I wasn't ready to entertain. Instead, I texted Natalie a pineapple and then another message. Fine. Proud. A few minutes later, 3 peach emojis came back, followed by, proud of you. Also, I'm bringing donuts because you just did a big thing and big things require fried dough. While I waited, I opened the envelope. Inside, printed photos, me at 7 with the science fair ribbon, me at 17 pale and grinning after state, Victoria with snowball ears like clouds, a gift card for the fancy grocery store near my place, for special allergy-friendly items. Mom had written in a post-it note that tried too hard, a brittle copy of a drawing I'd done in 2nd grade, a house with 4 stick figures holding hands, and their letter. Sophia, it began in my father's precise hand before switching to Mom's looping script halfway through. We read your letter. We wish you had given us a chance to talk sooner. We wish you could see that we did the best we could under the circumstances. We are sorry we didn't come that first night. We truly thought you would be fine and that you would not want a fuss. We did not understand how much this has hurt you over the years. We love you. Please give us an opportunity to make things right. It was almost but not quite an apology. The hinge point, a clean "we were wrong, we hurt you," was padded on both sides with the soft furniture of wish and circumstance. I set it down. Wishes fill rooms. They don't fix foundations. Natalie arrived with donuts and a look that was half celebration, half evaluation. "Is there anything fried dough cannot make at least slightly better?" she asked, already answering with a bite. "I'll let you know after 2, I said, tearing a glazed square in half. I told her about the threshold conversation, the envelope, the almost apology. She listened like she always does, not to reply but to understand. "Here's the thing," she said when I finished. "You're not on trial. You're rebuilding. Which means you get to choose the materials. If their letter isn't strong enough to hold weight, you don't stand on it just because it's the only beam they've offered." "That's annoyingly wise," I said, and we grinned again. If this were fiction in the neatest sense, the next week would be a montage. Therapy sessions with tidy takeaways, a phone call with my parents where they cry and say everything I've ever needed to hear, a sister who wakes up singularly transformed, a sudden ease. That's not what happened. What happened was more ordinary and therefore more miraculous. There were days I felt steady and days I trembled, calls that went okay and calls I ended early, and in the middle of that messy human work, the dull rhythm of living reestablished itself. I went back to work half-time at first. The office smelled like coffee and the ghost of whiteboard markers. Brian was himself, calm, never intrusive, quietly efficient about reassigning tasks I used to hoard. People stopped by my desk with small offerings. A plant cutting, "It's impossible to kill," which felt delightfully on theme. A playlist, low-energy bops for convalescence. A stack of ridiculous cat memes from HR taped together like a tiny banner. I didn't know how to receive with grace, I learned. At home I made new rituals. Morning window opens. Midday walk if the air quality app waved a green flag. Nighttime gratitude that didn't demand cheerfulness, just honesty. Mrs. Garza called every Tuesday at 6 to tell me my cat had learned to stare at her pressure cooker until it surrendered and she fed him a piece of carrot. "We are family now," she said, like it was a decision she'd made and therefore a fact, and I believed her. Once a video reaches the messy middle, you either bail or settle in. If you're still with me, settle in. And while you're here, tell me in the comments if you've ever set a boundary that changed how people treated you. Your stories help someone who's stuck between the letter they need to write and the door they're afraid to close. If this is giving you language you didn't have before, tap like so it reaches the next person on the edge of their own hard conversation. And subscribe if you want more real stories that don't flatten the hard parts to make neat endings. The first call with my parents was 22 minutes long and a masterclass in everything we'd always been. Dad opened with logistics. "When I could come by to pick up a few items of yours we found," as if belongings were the glue we lacked. Mom alternated between brittle cheer and wounded dignities. "I kept bringing us back to the thing under the things. I nearly died and you didn't come. This isn't about a casserole rotation. A lifetime of being optional rewires a person's nervous system. We always thought you were so strong," Mom said, as if strength exempted me from tenderness. "Victoria needed us," Dad added, as if need existed in a fixed economy and I'd simply failed to cue. "I am strong," I said. "And I needed you. Those two things can be true at the same time." There was a long exhale on the other end of the line, like a balloon recognizing it had been overinflated. "Tell us what you want now," Dad said. A pause, I answered. Consistent respect. No unannounced visits. No group ambushes with Victoria. If you want to talk, ask first. If I say no, accept it. If I say yes, stay on topic. Stop telling me I'm dramatic when I describe what happened to me. "We don't call you dramatic," Mom said, wounded. Then after a beat, "We have called you dramatic." "Hey," I said. "Thank you for the correction." By the fourth call, something had shifted from performance to possibility. They were still themselves, which meant the old defenses showed up like muscle memory, but sometimes they caught them before they landed. I did not mistake catching for changing. I did allow the effort to be noted. The surprise came from Victoria. 2 weeks after the letter, she sent me a video of Snowball romping in a yard the size of a small park. Kids squealed in the background. "Rehomed him with Mrs. Benson from church," her text read beneath the clip. "She has 3 littles and a fence and he is happier already. Also, signed a lease. Moving out in 2 weeks. Can I call?" On the phone, her voice was smaller than it usually is, which is to say it was closer to the child I used to build blanket forts with. "I thought you had an apartment," I said. "I had a bedroom with a ring light," she admitted. "And a dozen ways to not grow up. Sometimes people change because it becomes more painful not to. Sometimes they change because someone goes first and demonstrates that there's a solid floor under the leap." We talked for an hour. She did not defend our parents. She did not sputter excuses. She did something harder. She asked questions and waited for the answers. "Was it really like that when we were kids? How did I miss it? Did you hate me?" "I never hated you," I said, and we both cried because there are reliefs you don't know you're craving until you get them. "Can I take you to lunch?" she asked. When we met, she looked like a person wearing her own skin for the first time, awkwardly, bravely. "I'm sorry," she said before the menus arrived. "Not for being me. For benefiting from a system that hurt you. For not noticing the times you needed someone and I kept performing cute instead." "It wasn't a play with villains and heroes," I said. "It was a play with parents who didn't know their lines and kids who learned to improvise to survive. I'm not interested in punishing anybody. I'm interested in not pretending." We didn't agree to be best friends. We agreed to tell the truth more often and sooner and to ask, "Did that land how I meant it?" when we could feel old grooves tugging at our wheels. Meanwhile, Dr. Rivera adjusted my meds with the calm of someone who has walked many patients through storms. "Your body remembers chaos," she said. "We're teaching it new choreography." She handed me a flare plan, detailed and precise, and a card for a local support group for people with autoimmune conditions. I went on a Thursday, sat in a circle with nurses, teachers, a guy who ran a small landscaping business, and a grandma who crocheted blankets during chemo and distributed them like confetti to anyone who walked into the room looking cold. It was not dramatic. It was better. It was ordinary people telling the truth without dressing it up for company. "My family doesn't believe me until I'm hospitalized," said a woman my age with a gray beanie and eyes bright from steroids. "I used to perform wellness to avoid the fight." We nodded. We knew. In that room, I stopped narrating my pain like a lawyer. I started naming it like a person who deserves tenderness. You cannot get to the big speeches without practicing the smaller declarations first. A month in, Lydia asked me to write 2 lists. Things that make me feel seen, things that make me feel erased. Seen, someone remembering my med schedule and texting, "Take your 8 p.m." Being asked what my body needs instead of told what is most convenient. Invitations that come with an easy opt-out. Erased, "You're so strong you don't need us." Being told to relax when my throat is tightening, being praised for not having needs. We taped the lists to the inside cover of my journal, a compass for a person whose map used to be a plea. On a Tuesday in the middle of this practical magic, my parents emailed to ask if we could meet in person at a therapist's office. A mediated conversation to keep our edges from dragging on each other. I said yes. Not because I trusted them suddenly, but because I trusted myself more than I ever had. The waiting room had plants that had survived there for years, which felt like a promise. The therapist, an older man with the kind of eyebrows that make you think of books, welcomed us in and set ground rules I didn't have to enforce, which meant I could focus on the content, not the container. "We're not here to relitigate the past," he said. "We are here to name patterns, acknowledge harm, and talk about what a different future would require." Mom went first, which was new. "I thought making Victoria feel safe meant she needed constant attention," she said, a sentence with 1,000 small realizations stuffed inside it. "I told myself you were the strong one, and I used that story to excuse myself from the work of showing up. I'm sorry for that." Her voice cracked on the last word like a knuckle popping. I waited for the but. It didn't arrive immediately. It did arrive later in smaller forms, and we caught it when it did. Dad kept looking at the therapist for cues, which would have annoyed me 6 months ago, but now simply looked like a man who had never been given permission to not be certain. "I rationalized," he said. "It made me feel intelligent to put your feelings in context. It made me feel in control to call you dramatic. It was lazy. It was cruel." The words sat in the room like animals not yet tamed, but at least they had names. "Here's what I need," I said when it was my turn. "Stop narrating my body to me. Stop deciding which emergencies count. Stop treating Victoria's wants as needs and my needs as preferences. If you are unsure, ask. If you are unsure and I am telling you, believe me. And if you don't know what support looks like, offer choices. Do you want company at the doctor? A ride afterward? A day without hearing about anyone else's crisis. Accept the answer. We didn't leave holding hands. We left with a second appointment on the books and a shared document the therapist emailed us titled Sophia's Health and Boundaries, a phrase that would have sounded like an accusation to my parents 2 months earlier and now sounded like a project plan. Midway through all of this, life went on being life. The office softball team invited me to scorekeep because dust is not my friend and someone needed to heckle fairly. I joined a book club that read serious novels and then gossiped about the characters like they were neighbors, which felt delightfully petty in a world where I had been serious for too long. Mrs. Garza's daughter visited from out of state and cried on my couch because she'd been worried about her mom living alone. Then she hugged me and said, "Thank you for being here," and I realized I had become a person people could thank. And somewhere in the middle of a Thursday, my phone pinged with an email from a community center asking if I'd be willing to speak at their chronic illness workshop about boundaries with family. "We saw your comment in a support forum," the organizer wrote. "Your words were useful. Would you consider sharing them?" Old me would have replied, "I'm not qualified." New me wrote back, "Yes." Then I panicked and wrote Lydia, who replied with bullet points and a reminder to breathe 2 counts longer on the exhale than the inhale. The night of the workshop, 15 chairs filled with people in hoodies, blazers, yoga pants. I told them about Snowball and the nurse who held my hand and the letter on the bed. I told them about the first time I said, "No, not today," and the way my hands shook and how they stopped shaking sooner than I expected. I gave them the list from my journal and told them to make their own. When I finished, a man in the back with a cane said, "My mom calls me every morning to tell me her cat coughed. I answer every call because it feels like love. I think it's actually control." Heads nodded. We were a choir without music, harmonizing anyway. Halfway through filming this story, I realized something obvious that we forget because pain is so loud. You can build at the same time you set boundaries. You don't have to stand in a doorway forever. You can plant. If you're still watching, tell me one small thing you planted for yourself this week. A routine, a practice, a playlist that tells your nervous system it's allowed to unclench. Hit like if this gave you words and subscribe if you want the continuation, because there's a letter my parents wrote that surprised me, and a decision about moving cities that turned out not to be running away but running toward. The surprise arrived in the mail in a pale blue envelope with my mother's handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper, not on monogrammed stationery, not weighted down with apologies she didn't mean. Said, "We are starting family therapy without you. Not because we think you owe us reconciliation, but because we owe each other the work regardless. Thank you for telling us the truth. We will let you know how it goes if you want to know. Love, Mom." A post-it note in Dad's printing was stuck to the corner. I read 2 articles about biphasic anaphylaxis and it scared me in the correct way. The clinical phrase, the humility, the admission. It caught me off guard and then softened something that had been locked. Victoria, for her part, showed up with boxes and bubble wrap at my door 2 months after that first lunch. "I signed a lease across town," I told her. "Better filtration. Closer to work. It's not running away. It's running where your lungs like you," she said, popping bubble wrap and smiling. "I brought sandwiches and also a promise. I will not ask you to break your pace for me." Moving day looked like friends in old t-shirts, a rented truck, and the quiet choreography of people who care. Brian carried boxes labeled books like they were newborns. Natalie directed traffic with a clipboard and an authority that would have shamed any general. Mrs. Garza supervised from a folding chair and told everyone where to put things in a way that somehow didn't feel bossy. We ate pizza on the floor that night and I went to bed in a room that felt like it had been waiting for me all along. Sometimes revenge is a loud speech at a wedding. Sometimes it's a purchase you make with money they didn't know you had. Mine turned out to be a small, stubborn life that loved me back. Air filters humming, a kettle that remembered when to whistle, a front desk guard who learned my name and never let packages sit in the lobby, a cat who slept on my notes like he understood what paper could hold. I still had hard days. I still woke from dreams where I was asked to justify my oxygen. But the hard days didn't last as long and the justification part got quieter. I caught myself in elevators and checkout lines, doing something I couldn't identify at first and then realized I was humming. On a Sunday morning in late spring, I drove to a park by the river where the Air app glowed green. I brought a notebook and the pen Ellie had slipped into my hand the day I wrote my hospital letter. Families with strollers moved past. A boy fed a goose and then shouted with delight when the goose fed itself like he'd invented autonomy. I wrote a new letter, not to my parents, not to Victoria, not to the nurse or the doctor or the support group. I wrote to the version of me who sat outside your doors and convinced herself she didn't need anyone. You were wrong in the only way that doesn't require an apology, I wrote. You needed. And you learned that needing didn't make you weak. It made you honest. You stopped auditioning. You started belonging. Good job. A shadow fell over the page. Soph. Victoria stood there, wind-blown, face bare of makeup. She held out a coffee. I texted. You didn't answer. I took a chance. You took a chance, I echoed, surprised it felt sweet instead of invasive. I took the coffee. We sat. For a long time we didn't talk. Then she said, Mom asked if she could send you medical articles without commentary. She said the therapist told her she needed to learn how to support you without telling you what to do. That's the dream, I said, and we both laughed. Can I ask something? She said after a while. Yes. What's it like to breathe now? I considered. It's like opening a window and having the air come in because that's what air does, I said. It's like music you forgot you knew. It's like realizing the door you closed was also a door you opened. She nodded like she understood at least the feeling, if not all of the words. I want that, she said. You can have it, I said. It's not scarce. It just costs honesty. When I got home, there was an email waiting from the community center. The workshop waitlist is long, it read. Would you consider a series? My hands hovered over the keys. Old me would have said, let me think about it, which is a kind way to say no without saying no. New me remembered my own advice to strangers on a Thursday night in a multipurpose room that smelled faintly of tempera paint. I typed, yes. Let's talk schedule. You've made it through the middle with me. If any part of this has put words to a thing you've been carrying, drop a comment with the sentence you needed most. If you know someone who keeps choosing air that doesn't love them back because it's the only kind they've known, share this with them. Hit like so it keeps showing up for the people whose algorithm hasn't learned yet that boundaries are a form of love. And stay with me because the next turn isn't neat but it's honest. A family dinner where no one pretends it's fine, a voicemail I saved because my mother learned to say a sentence she's never said, and the very practical checklist I wish I'd had the night I decided to put a letter on an empty bed and walk out into my own life. The dinner happened on a Wednesday because the therapist said midweek take some performance pressure off people who learn to turn weekends into stages. We chose a restaurant with a patio and an allergy policy that read like poetry to my lungs. No pets allowed, high-efficiency filters, a server who said, tell me everything you need and I'll write it down twice. I arrived 10 minutes early and asked for a corner table where the wind came from the river, not the street. When the hostess led me there, she smiled at the medical bracelet on my wrist and said, we've got you. It's a tiny sentence and it shouldn't be extraordinary, but it felt like someone had pulled a thorn I'd stopped noticing and then waited to see if I cried. Dad came in first, tie loosened, eyes scanning for exits the way men do when they expect a debate. Mom followed with a small notebook, the kind you buy when you're trying to learn a new language, and Victoria came last not because she was late, but because she paused at the door as if asking the night for permission. She saw me and her mouth shaped the word hey like we were teenagers and everything was still possible. We sat. The menus were a mercy. You cannot accuse someone while they're explaining the merits of roasted carrots. We ordered. We breathed. The therapist's ground rules had traveled here with us. No interrupting, no diagnosing motive, no you always, no you never, no bringing up anyone's dog as a metaphor for commitment. I want to start, Mom said, surprising all of us including herself. She placed the notebook beside her water as if it deserved a seat. I have rehearsed this in the car and it sounded better there, but I'm going to say it anyway. Sophia, I'm sorry I didn't come to the hospital when they told us you might not make it through the night. I was wrong. I hurt you. I told myself a story that protected me from panic and it became a habit of not believing your emergencies. She looked up then, eyes red but not looking for pity. I believed that if I called you strong, I could keep living the way I wanted without changing anything. That belief was selfish. I didn't say it's okay because it wasn't. I didn't say I understand because I do, and understanding isn't the same as absolving. I did the new thing. Thank you for saying you were wrong, I said. I needed to hear that exact sentence. Dad leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands folded like prayer. I used the word dramatic because it made me feel rational, he said. It was a shortcut to not having to feel helpless. It made me cruel. I am sorry. The server arrived with iced tea and the kind of timing that saves lives. We all said thank you with a grateful intensity that made her grin and say, "I'm just bringing leaves and water," but we knew better. She set down a plate of olives we hadn't ordered and I thought, kindness is a language my family never studied and I am finally fluent. "So what now?" Dad asked, and for the first time it wasn't rhetorical. It was a real question. I took out the paper I'd tucked beneath my phone, unfolded it, smoothed the creases. We are always told not to read from notes. No one tells you that sometimes notes keep a conversation from collapsing into history. "What now looks like this," I said. 1. No surprise visits. 2. No arguing with my body. If I say I'm unwell, the conversation becomes, "How can we support you?" Not, "Are you sure?" 3. Separate relationships. I love Victoria, but I won't be triangulated. No more group texts where I am cast as ungrateful because I didn't show up to solve a crisis I didn't cause. 4. If you want to help, offer 2 or 3 choices and let me pick, or say no. 5. If you don't know what to say, try, "I believe you," or "I'm sorry that happened," or "Do you want company or space?" Mom wrote the sentences down like a student who still likes pens. Dad nodded once as if to say, "I can do that, I can do that, I can try." Victoria swallowed and asked, "Can I add something?" We looked at her. "If I call you with a problem," she said to me, "you can say, 'Do you want comfort or coaching?' And if I say comfort, you can remind me of this night and tell me to ask my therapist." I have one now. Wednesday mornings. Our food arrived. We ate slowly because we were practicing not rushing to the end. When the check came, Dad put his card on it without ceremony. "Consider this a reparation for a percentage point of your hospital copay," he said, trying for humor and landing somewhere honest instead. We stood in the kind of awkward circle families stand in when they don't know what shape they are anymore. Mom reached out, stopped herself and asked, "Hug?" Consent is a small miracle when you have grown up inside a weather system that assumes access. I said yes. She held me like someone returning a book they wanted to keep but finally understood wasn't theirs. If you're still watching, breathe with me for 4 counts in, 6 counts out. And if any of this is helping you script your own next dinner, the one where you refuse to pretend it's fine, tap like so the algorithm sends this to someone who needs it tonight. Drop a comment with 1 boundary sentence you're willing to say out loud. People read these and copy them into their phones. You might be writing someone else's lifeline. The voicemail came 2 nights later, late enough that my phone was face down on the nightstand and the room was the kind of dark that makes you feel brave. I listened in the morning because sleep and courage both honor closed doors. "Sophia," my mother's voice said, quiet and unadorned. "I listened to the nurse who told me you might die and I still didn't come. I said out loud to a stranger that I couldn't because your sister was walking her dog. That sentence is going to live inside me for a long time. I am sorry. I was wrong. How can I support you today?" It was all there. The thing she did, the admission, the apology, the question. I saved it. When I doubt, I play it. Not because an apology erases anything, but because it records a bridge. Life didn't pivot into a montage after that either. It lengthened in both directions, inviting me to notice what held and what still snapped. On a Saturday, Victoria came over with a box labeled relics, and together we sorted childhood into keep/donate/haunt. We found the blue ribbon from my science fair, a program from her first soccer championship where my name was spelled incorrectly and no one had noticed, a photo of a birthday cake with my name written so small it looked like a footnote. We laughed until we cried, then cried until we laughed. "We are both archaeologists," she said, "and the dig site is us." We ordered noodle soup and called it dinner because sometimes the only way through is broth. On a Monday, Dad texted, "Your appointment at 2:10. Do you want me in the waiting room or on standby at home?" It was clumsy and perfect. I looked at the screen for a long time and then typed, "Standby at home. If I text crumbs, call me and talk about the weather for 3 minutes." He replied with a cloud emoji which somehow did the job. On a Thursday, I walked into the community center with a folder titled, Boundaries 101, and 15 people showed up again, each with a story and a question. We did role plays that felt as silly as theater camp and as necessary as CPR. "How do I say no without them hating me?" a woman in a blazer asked, twisting her wedding ring. "You don't," I said gently. "You say no because your no is the yes you owe your own body." The room went quiet and then filled with the sound of pens. At the end, a man in a navy hoodie approached. "I told my dad I couldn't talk about politics on Sunday calls anymore," he said, and he hung up. I'm pretending not to be devastated. How do I not be devastated? I told him the truth. You don't. You grieve the father you wanted. And you practice calling someone else at that time who doesn't demand you bleed to prove you have a heart. He nodded, the kind of nod people do when they're putting a key on a ring. Somewhere in there, Mom started emailing me articles about anaphylaxis with the subject line, for awareness, no response needed unless you want to. She sometimes included a sentence that said, I didn't know this. I'm learning. Once she wrote, today at therapy I said, my daughter's needs are not criticisms. It felt like lifting something heavy. I wrote back, it was heavy. I carried it a long time. She replied with a heart. Not the emoji, she typed the word. It landed like someone opened a window a little wider. The checklist came out of those nights I lay awake thinking of all the past versions of me who could have used a script, a list, a lantern. I wrote it for them and for you. I wrote it on paper first because my hands needed to make a sound against something. Here is the practical list I wish I had the night I decided to put a letter on an empty hospital bed and walk toward a life that didn't demand I stop breathing to be loved. 1. Medical readiness. Keep a folder, physical and digital, with diagnoses, medication list, allergies, physician contacts, and your emergency plan written in plain language. Tape a one-page summary inside your pantry door. Put a photo of it on your lock screen when you're in crisis. 2. Emergency contacts. Choose 2 people who answer phones and respect boundaries. Ask them in advance. Can I list you? Will you advocate without arguing with doctors? Will you feed my cat? If they say yes, write their names where a nurse will see them. Remove people who think dramatic is a diagnosis. 3. Boundary scripts. Write 3 sentences you can send when you can't carry anyone else's panic. Mine, I'm not available to discuss that. Here are 2 times I can talk. I won't be answering calls today. Text if there's an emergency and please define emergency. I can't host your feelings about my health right now. Copy and paste is a form of self-rescue. 4. Safe space plan. Identify 3 places you can go on short notice where your body is not punished. Friend's couch, pet-free hotel, a neighbor's spare room. Pack a small go bag with meds, charger, soft t-shirt that feels like permission. A written note to yourself for when you forget why you're leaving. You are not abandoning them. You are choosing air. 5. Money map. Open a small savings account named Breath Fund. Put $40 in it when you can. This is not financial advice. It is a love letter to the version of you who thinks you need permission to buy a lift to the ER. You don't. 6. Documentation. If you need to write a letter to family, say what happened without metaphors. Name the pattern. Name the boundary. Name what future contact requires. Keep it to 2 pages if you can. Read it out loud to a friend who loves you. 7. Aftercare. Schedule something kind for the hour after a hard conversation. Warm food, a shower, a show you've seen before, a person who says, I'm proud of you without implying the performance continues. 8. Script for when they show up anyway. I'm not receiving visitors. You can email me. I'm closing the door now. Then close it. Lock it. Put your phone on Do Not Disturb and text your code word to your person. 9. Joy inventory. Make a list of small things that tell your nervous system it's safe now. Your neighbor's soup. A certain stretch that makes your ribs remember they're a cage and not a vice. The exact playlist that carries you from panic to present. Keep it where you can see it. 10. Forgiveness note. Write this sentence on a sticky note and stick it to your mirror. Forgiveness is a gift I give myself. Reconciliation is a gift we build together. You are not required to do the second to enjoy the first. If you think you might need that list, screenshot or copy it down. If you've got an edition that saved you, put it in the comments so someone else can add it to theirs. This is how we build the handbook we weren't given. Tap like so this list rides the algorithm into the hands of whoever is packing a bag right now in the dark. There were setbacks. Of course there were. On a hot day in July, Mom called me in tears because a cousin had said something sharp about our absence from a reunion and she was in the old pose, hurt looking for a hero. Call your therapist, I said gently. Then call me back and tell me one thing you learned. She hung up. I cried. She called back an hour later and said, I learned I expect you to regulate my feelings because it's easier than regulating them myself. I said, thank you for learning that. We didn't fix it, we witnessed it. On a gray morning in August, My body flared for no reason I could determine, because bodies are not courtroom exhibits. I texted Dad crumbs, and he called and talked about the weather in a cadence that could have lulled a thunderstorm. 72, he said. Clouds shaped like ferry boats. Squirrels in a meeting. He did not ask, "Are you okay?" Because sometimes the kindness is not asking a question the answer to which you cannot give without breaking. He texted later, standing by. Proud of you. I saved that one too. And then it was my birthday. I didn't mean to make a thing of it. Sometimes grief keeps you from looking directly at a date. But Victoria texted, "Leave Saturday open," and Natalie sent a cryptic peach emoji, and Mrs. Garza claimed a corner of my calendar like a general. I showed up at the community garden by the river to find a long table under a string of lights and people I had built and people who had built me. There were flowers that didn't make me sneeze and a banner that said, "Sophia is still here," in letters cut from magazines like a ransom note demanding joy. There was a cake with my name written the size of a declaration. There were cards with sentences that said things like, "You made my boundary sentence easier to say. Thank you for teaching me that strong people need naps. Your breath is not a compromise, it's the point." I did not check my phone because it wasn't that kind of night, but later, home and soft, I saw a text from Mom. "Happy birthday. We made a donation in your name to the allergy clinic. No candles because we learned about particulates. I'm learning." It landed gentler than it would have months ago, not because the gift or the line was extraordinary, but because I had stopped grading every gesture for extra credit. You either show up to class or you don't. Today they were in the building. A week after the garden, the therapist asked if I wanted a session with just my parents. "You can come or not," he said, "but sometimes it's useful to hear each other in the presence of a third person who doesn't think anyone needs to win." I went because the version of me who wrote that first letter wanted to see what could grow in the empty space it created. Mom brought the notebook again. Dad brought a pen he clicked when he was about to lie to himself and then put it down when he noticed. "This is what they said that mattered. We confused your capacity for competence with a lack of need. We liked how Victoria's dependence made us feel important and we resented your independence because it didn't. We thought money was love. We were wrong." I said, "I am not a report you file. I'm not a crisis you contain. I am your daughter, and if that word cannot teach you tenderness, then I will use other words to define us." We walked out into a sky that looked like a soft bruise healing. At the curb, Mom said, "I found your second grade drawing in a box, the one where all four of us are holding hands in front of the house. I've been mad at that picture for a week because it felt like a lie, and then I realized it was a wish you drew with crayons. I wish I had known to hold your hand tighter." I said, "We can learn now." We didn't take each other's hands because this is a documentary, not a drama, but we stood close enough for the wind to have to choose a path, and it chose through us. "If you're building your own dinner voicemail checklist arc, I see you. I cannot promise your mother will say the sentence on your voicemail. I cannot promise your father will learn the weather script or your sibling will trade their ring light for a lamp that tells the truth. I will promise this: breath returns. It doesn't apologize. It doesn't explain. It just comes back, stubborn and benevolent like a neighbor with soup." Before we close, a last small thing that felt big. I went back to the hospital a month ago not as a patient, but to drop off a stack of letters for Ellie to keep at the nurse's station for the next person who needs to write their own. Each envelope says, "If you need words, borrow mine." Inside is a template with blanks and the sentence, "I was wrong," printed in a font you can't argue with. Ellie hugged me. "We look out for each other," she said like a blessing. "We do," I said like an answer. Tell me in the comments one sentence you wish someone had said to you, and one sentence you're willing to say to yourself today. If this story helped you breathe, tap like so the next tired algorithm learns the shape of care. Subscribe if you want more stories that don't end when the music swells, because healing is a chorus and there's room for your verse. And if you need a sign tonight, here. You are not dramatic, you're alive. You are not difficult, you're precise. You are not unlovable. You're learning to love yourself in a way that doesn't require an audience. I will be here next week with a workshop schedule, a new boundary script that sounded ridiculous until it worked, and maybe, if I can find the right words, a letter to the girl in the second grade drawing who thought she had to color everyone else in before she could draw her own face.